There's this really strange, kind of uncomfortable truth about learning that almost nobody talks about. If you look at the absolutely most powerful, genuinely formidable thinkers in literally any field, you'll start to notice something surprising. They rarely rely entirely on their formal education. Actually, scratch that. They never just rely on it. Instead, at some pivotal moment, they stepped up and took complete, uncompromising responsibility for their own deep learning. They went way, way deeper into a subject than any school or university would ever ask them to go. And this creates what our source material calls a dangerously self-educated mind. Now, not dangerous in a harmful way, right? But dangerous because their sheer depth of understanding makes them impossible to manipulate and just incredibly good at solving problems. So, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the ancient Japanese master-apprentice traditions that forge this exact type of intellect. Okay, let's dive into this roadmap for our explainer. We're going to cover the uncomfortable truth, understanding before reading, mastering a single domain, the thinking document, application over accumulation, and finally, the dangerous mind. So right off the bat, there's this stark contrast between two very different types of thinkers. On one side, you've got your credentialed but shallow thinker. You know the type. They consume endless content. They stack up degrees like trophies, but they rely heavily on institutions to tell them what actually matters. But on the flip side, we have the dangerously self-educated individual. They might read way less volume, but the genuine depth they possess, it's incredible. They see these hidden connections that everyone else completely misses, and they can work complex problems all the way through to conclusions that'll surprise even the leading experts in a given field. Part 1. The uncomfortable truth, moving beyond formal education. Which leads us right into Part 2, understanding before reading, the power of Rakai. So look, our modern habit of just consuming endless content, scrolling articles, binge-watching tutorials, skimming through books, it produces almost zero real understanding. We tend to treat information like something that just passes through our eyes. But the older Japanese tradition, which is rooted in centuries of master and apprentice learning, recognized that real knowledge isn't just accumulated, it's forged. This framework basically demands that we completely redefine what it actually means to read, using this incredible concept called Rakai. Rakai literally means to grasp something so thoroughly that it physically becomes a part of you. It's treated as a fundamentally different activity than just the surface-level act of reading. Instead of racing to finish a whole chapter, Rakai suggests taking an entire afternoon to sit with just 3 pages. So how do we actually do this? Well, to achieve Rakai, there are 3 distinct steps. First up, you've got to slow down dramatically. Take the ideas and break them into smaller and smaller parts. Second, visualize the concept. I mean, literally close your eyes and build the idea in your imagination until you can see it perfectly without the book right in front of you. And third, explain it simply. Imagine you're explaining this concept to a total beginner. Because honestly, if you can't explain an idea simply, you just do not truly understand it yet. Doing this slow, deliberate engagement, it produces more real knowledge in 3 pages than ordinary reading does in 300. All right, Part 3, mastering a single domain, embracing Ichi ni Jihu. So now that we kind of know how to absorb knowledge, let's talk about what we should actually be studying. A super common mistake people make when they first start taking self-education seriously is trying to study everything all at once. Philosophy in the morning, history over lunch, economics at night. But true mastery requires a completely different approach. The Japanese tradition relies on a principle called ichi-nihu, which translates to entering deeply into one art. It suggests that the real path to becoming genuinely formidable runs straight through extreme depth in a single domain. When you commit to one domain for years, you eventually hit this layer of understanding where the underlying structures of all knowledge just begin to reveal themselves. And the beautiful part? Those structures transfer to literally everywhere else. And this brilliantly illustrates the profound difference here. Mastering one single thing teaches you how to learn. You start seeing the deep underlying structures of knowledge itself. But dabbling in 20 things, well, that just gives you a really scattered exposure. You basically only learn how to dabble. So choosing your one domain is absolutely crucial. It has to be something you can spend years inside without losing interest. And once you pick it, you've got to protect your focus with this quiet stubbornness that will make you genuinely formidable. Moving on to Part 4, the thinking document, writing as thinking. Okay, this brings us to a really transformative daily practice drawn directly from the journals of Japanese scholars and craftsmen. It's called the thinking document. First, we kind of have to unlearn what school taught us about notes. Taking notes is mostly just a passive record of what you've read, but a thinking document? That's a record of what you have come to think. In the Japanese intellectual tradition, writing isn't just a way to record your finished thoughts. The actual act of writing is the engine of thinking itself. You're writing constantly, not for an audience, but entirely for your own mind. There's this fantastic quote from the source material that hits the nail on the head. The vague ideas in your mind, which felt complete while they remained unspoken, suddenly show their gaps and contradictions when you try to put them into written sentences. I mean, how true is that? Writing forces absolute clarity. It acts like a mirror that aggressively reveals exactly what you don't actually understand yet. To put that into perspective, the creator of our source material shares this really powerful anecdote about their grandfather, Dike. Dike kept a private thinking document for over 40 years. 4 decades! It became this living conversation with himself, allowing him to return to old ideas, revise them, and notice these massive patterns across decades. By the end of his life, he'd built a depth of quiet, profound thought that simply could not have been achieved any other way. All right, part 5, application over accumulation, knowledge in the hands. Now, this right here is exactly where most self-education projects quietly fail. You can master how to read, you can choose your perfect domain, you can write brilliantly, but honestly, it means absolutely nothing without application. Let me just ask you this directly. Is your knowledge just decorative furniture? Because so many people accumulate this massive amount of theoretical knowledge. They can drop references, talk about super complex ideas, and sound incredibly smart. But that knowledge never actually enters their lives. It just sits up there in their minds like expensive furniture in a room that nobody is ever allowed to sit on. To combat this, the Japanese tradition insists on Zen. This is the bringing of knowledge into lived practice. It is the exact moment when your learning actually becomes real. Because true understanding has to move out of your mind, down into your hands, and straight into your daily judgment. So the crucial point is that every significant idea you encounter has to be tested against your actual life immediately. If you're studying philosophy, apply its principles to your daily decisions today. If you're studying economics, go make predictions about real markets and actually track if you were right. If you study writing, publish things that real people will read. Knowledge that gets applied takes root, right? But knowledge that stays theoretical simply fades away. Which brings us to our final section, part 6, the dangerous mind, the ultimate result. When you actually pull all 4 of these principles together, Rakai, Ichigani-hu, the thinking document, and Zen, you forge the ultimate result, the dangerous mind. A dangerously self-educated person thinks completely independently, without ever waiting to be told what to think by some authority. They are entirely unimpressed by formal credentials, mostly because they know that degrees and real understanding rarely coincide. They completely resist manipulation because they've built this core habit of testing every idea against lived experience. And they possess this quiet, unshakable confidence because they know exactly what they understand, and maybe even more importantly, exactly where the edges of their understanding lie. But look, this level of mastery doesn't happen overnight. It takes years of deliberate, slow, deep work on yourself, with absolutely no one watching and no one handing you a gold star. And that leaves us with this final thought to close out our explainer. The absolute most important learning of your entire life is going to happen outside of any classroom. So, will you merely fill your mind with the contents of other people's ideas, or will you take complete responsibility, commit to the slow, deep work, and genuinely shape your mind yourself? The path is right there. The choice is yours. Thank you so much for joining me, and take good care of your mind. It's the only one you'll ever have.